Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between.
A bit tired.
Well, you told me when I walked in you'd just been for a cycle ride.
I have, and it's the first one I've done in a very long time. Oh my goodness.
Was there anything paranormal in it?
Only the way I felt afterwards. Actually, on the paranormal front, I mean, nothing that's worth recounting, but I've had lots of mini jots this week. Just people talking about stuff and, you know, just like little coincidences. Again, nothing worth mentioning, but yeah, lots of little jots this week I've had.
You do get weeks like that, I think.
Yeah.
Where a topic comes up and then somebody else mentions it and then you see a thing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm possessed with evil spirits.
That sounds like a segue coming up the road.
Oh, you got it. You got it. Yes, well, today, Ben, I want to talk about exorcisms. Exorcisms, plural of exorcism, or is it exorcism, the plural of...
Exorci. Exorcisms, I think.
I'm going with exorcisms. I've been kind of trailing this a little bit, the book I've been reading, and I have struggled a bit putting this episode together. Probably worth saying as well, given the themes of today's episode, if you're listening to this with young people around, with young ears, you might want to be a little bit careful because we are going to discuss some of those topics.
At my age, most ears are younger.
Yeah, that's true. We're back to your ears and hearing again.
Oh, God, yeah. The phantom hearing.
So I think I have struggled with it, Ben, because it is a topic I find difficult to cover and approach with an open mind. And I think that's connected to a few things. Firstly, the thought that many people who've gone through an exorcism were likely suffering from a mental condition. And that process could potentially both physically and mentally be harmful to them, almost encouraging their delusions.
Yes.
So that's one. I'm also wary, given the history of people who it has been claimed were possessed by demons and the devil. Many just because they held views outside mainstream religion or their culture. And quite a lot of people who were just neurodivergent as well, which is very sad.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many examples of autistic people who are believed to be possessed and subject to exorcisms, especially non-verbal neurodiverse people. So that's another one that raises where I find it a difficult topic. And maybe on a kind of simpler personal level, maybe because I'm predominantly left-handed, which sounds like a weird thing, but certainly in the Middle Ages and later, people were persecuted, accused of witchcraft, and were believed to be possessed by demons or the devil simply because their left hand was more prominent than their right.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I remember when I was at primary school, teachers trying to make me write with my right hand, not my left hand.
Yeah, it was very much a thing, yes.
I thought, why?
I don't know, it's odd, isn't it?
I mean, the only kind of logical is, I guess, back in the day you were using fountain pens, so you could smudge it with your kind of arm trailing across the page. But, you know, making somebody just write with the hand that they're not used to using. Anyway, I digress. So there are a lot of reasons why I might have a negative bias against the idea in modern times of performing an exorcism. But I guess my main concern is that question of whether people who undergo an exorcism ritual are just suffering from a mental condition rather than being possessed by evil spirits. So yeah, people who need a psychiatrist or a therapist rather than an exorcist and then have to go through all this stuff. But that led me to a fascinating book by the author Richard Gallagher titled Demonic Foes. Now, I was drawn to this book because the author, Dr. Richard Gallagher, is a psychiatrist who ended up working with the church, assessing people who are believed to be possessed. So his role was basically to work out whether the people that were referred to him were suffering from a psychiatric or a medical condition, or if something more demonic might be going on.
Yes, because the church is quite good at sort of making sure that a possession really is a possession. From everything that I've read, they're very careful that this isn't a mental condition, because obviously that would be a bad thing, but also would reflect very badly.
Yeah, I think that's true. And certainly that does come across in the book. Certainly, the more mainstream churches, the Catholic Church, there is a whole process. I don't think it's always been in place, but certainly in modern times it's in place. I guess there are many other variations of religious faiths and organisations, even within the Christian faith, where they're not. So, you think of televangelists and stuff like that, and where there's not much regulation of what's going on, but certainly the mainstream, yes. Now, before we get into the book, shall we have a quick look at the history of exorcism?
Oh, yes.
When we think about exorcisms, our mind tends to go to it being a Catholic thing, with priests, I guess, chucking holy water around, speaking in Latin. There's a lot of Latin speaking going on. And I think this may be heavily influenced in modern culture by the impact of movies like William Friedkin's 1973 film, The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. And I guess, the hundreds of movies that it inspired. However, people have been trying to get rid of those possessed by demons way before the Christian religion. So I found this good summary of the history of exorcism in National Geographic. So I'm just going to use that as my basis. So they say, in Mesopotamia, during the first millennia BC, purveyors of magic called Asipu, I think they're called, Asipu, staved off and expelled demons that brought illness and chaos. As spiritual healers, Asipu were esteemed protectors who used amulets, performed elaborate rituals, and when needed, engaged helper demon figures in their efforts.
Helper demons?
Yeah.
I think the Mesopotamian legends are used quite a lot as the at the basis of the Ghostbusters things, aren't they? Dan Aykroyd's character.
Yes, yeah.
mentions this, yes.
Yes. Now, the ancient Greek word daemon, from which the modern demon derives, referred to godlike spirits and supernatural forces. While a daemon could be good or evil, the latter was a malevolent force that needed to be cast out or exorcised. The 1st century AD historian Josephus recounted the story of Eliza, a man who freed others from demons by drawing it out of his nostrils and repeatedly invoking King Solomon's name, attesting to a form of exorcism in the Jewish tradition as well. Now, with the growth of Christianity during the first 3 centuries AD, the established themes of exorcism found even stronger footing. Exorcism became a means to unite the Christian faithful and vindicate their beliefs in the wake of religious persecution. The spread of Christianity meant paganism took on an evil connotation. We've seen this a lot in other stuff that we've covered, haven't we? Mm. Transforming non-Christian beliefs into something that needed to be exorcised. As a result, renouncing paganism as an evil became a requirement for baptism into the Christian faith. Falling back under the influence of pagan belief was therefore akin to being possessed. Exorcism in this context was a voluntary mechanism used to strengthen both the Christian faith and the Christian community. So yeah, it seemed a bit from that part of the article, it almost became a battleground or a thing to be used to defeat paganism, or at least keep people within the faith.
That definitely makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. But then, so that then is sort of taking advantage of, I guess, the stories and perception of people rather than the actual reality of a possession.
Yeah, in that sense, I think it's a much wider context than we probably think of it today. Yes, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, because today you sort of, quite often in day-to-day language, you could say, oh, he's acting possessed.
Yeah.
It's become part of the colloquial language.
Yeah, that's certainly the case in different times. And I didn't realise this, but converts and aspiring Christians underwent daily morning exorcism in the lead up to a baptism.
Okay.
On the day of the baptism, a bishop literally blew evil influences off of them through a process called exsufflication. In the moments before being baptised, the individual was anointed with oil that itself had been exorcised.
Gosh, they really did go to town.
Yeah, can you imagine? You have Time for my daily exorcism.
Yeah. Is that because there's this thought that if you open yourself up, I'm just making this up now, but I can imagine where it comes from. If you're opening up somebody to receive what you believe is a Holy Spirit, maybe you're also accidentally inviting a demon. Is that maybe the thought?
Yeah, or I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not getting this from the research, or I wonder if it's like everyone has the potential to have a level of evil spirit in them, and to go for the purity of the baptism, you've almost got to exercise any kind of evil spirits or thoughts. Cleansing kind of thing.
Cleansing, yeah.
Outside of baptism, churchmen carried out exorcisms by laying hands on the possessed while commanding the evil spirits to leave their bodies, so very much like it is today. Christians in late antiquity and early Middle Ages could exorcise themselves by calling on a saint as an intercessor, going to a shrine and appealing for aid from a sacred entity to get closer to God and further away from evil. So I thought that was an interesting summary from National Geographic. I thought they kind of laid it out quite well.
Yeah, I actually feel a lot clearer, just because, not in a glib way, but I think it is quite difficult to discern exactly what you mean. You know, when you mention it, I sort of either think The Exorcist or I think of Derek Acora.
Right, being possessed by a spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Which he almost certainly wasn't, right. I don't think, but,
Who knows?
You can't defame the dead, and he's not here.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that struck me about it was, certainly in those early historical times, certainly in Christianity, it was almost an everyday thing. You know what I mean? Rather than we see it as this kind of extreme example now, but it seemed maybe in a milder sense as part of the main body of the religion in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's get back to the book and some background on the author, Dr. Richard Gallagher, who is a respected American psychiatrist, author and professor of psychology, who began working with a couple of Catholic exorcists. Now, his role basically was to assess people who'd been identified by the church as potentially needing a formal exorcism. Gallagher would consult with the priests and those seeking the exorcism to ascertain whether there was a psychological explanation or diagnosis for their claims of spirit possession, or whether there was something else going on, something that warranted an exorcism to help them get rid of the evil spirits. Now, the cases he details in the book are mostly cases he was directly involved in. There are some others which have been verified, he says, by credible observers. All the names have been changed in the book to kind of protect people, which makes sense. And the author sets out his reason for writing this book. The goal, he says, is to present the persistent but unequivocal factual evidence of demonic possession and assaults in a contemporary context. Open-minded readers can then interpret that evidence for themselves. So, Ben, that is what I've tried to do. As always, we try and keep an open mind on this podcast to anything we cover.
Yeah.
But I was conscious about what I was talking about earlier, about my own bias and thoughts. So what I did, a bit kind of like, maybe because we did that remote viewing thing the other week, I just started keeping little notes as I was going through of when, like, is this my bias coming out? Well, and just trying to get some of those thoughts down.
Yeah.
Now, early in the book, the author makes a point that is similar to another book I featured a few weeks ago. Do you remember we did that episode on ESP and that author, Rupert Sheldrake?
Yes. Yeah, I like that.
And he makes a similar point, the fact that if so many people believe, how can it be paranormal? It's just normal.
Right, yeah.
And he points out in the book that a recent poll found that 70% of Americans believe in evil spirits, with 50% believing in the possibility of demonic attacks on humans. So that is quite high, actually.
That is a lot, actually.
He also points out the concept that humans can become possessed by demons and that forms of exorcism are found in most cultures and religions around the world. Though he does acknowledge that, that has often come with abuse and harm as well. So I think it's worth pointing out the author is a practicing Christian and believer, but he's also a prominent psychologist and psychiatrist with a strong background in recognising, diagnosing and treating people with mental disorders. There was part of me was hoping there would be a bit more detail about potentially his struggles between his professional background and his faith in this context, but there wasn't as much as I would have liked, in a way, in the book. But he does talk about initially being a skeptic about exorcism and spirit possession, which is interesting.
That's a good place to start. So he's obviously had his mind changed, and so he's laying out the things that made him change and asking whether they would change yours.
Yeah, exactly. He does make it pretty clear throughout the book that most people he sees or assesses on behalf of the church are suffering from diagnosable mental conditions or physical conditions and are not possessed by demons.
Right.
But some, he believes, are genuinely possessed by evil spirits who are trying to corrupt or destroy their spiritual belief or moral compass. One quote in the book, which I think is a good summary of his position, he says, "Despite the various theories about spirits, there are striking commonalities to the varied type of possessions reported across widely divergent cultures throughout history. Whatever the explanation, the common element remains that a spiritual attack of some kind occurred. If such an attack can't be ascribed to evil spirits, words lose their meaning." He does go on to put the other side. Exploitative individuals may act on their mistaken perception that individuals are suffering from demonic attack, when a professional eye on the afflicted are obviously suffering from demonic attack, when to a professional eye, the afflicted are obviously psychiatrically or medically impaired. Even worse are the sad episodes of psychological abuse by ill-advised efforts to, quote-unquote, liberate victims. These abuses are not new. Historical and current efforts to expel demons by aggressive or dangerous means, such as through beating, torture, remain as inefficacious as they are ignorant and at times sadistic. Problems caused by spiritual entities require spiritual help, which eschews all violence.
I'm glad we got that sorted, because I have come, one does read about those sorts of things, particularly where I guess perhaps the church doesn't have such a heavy influence. You do get reports of these beatings coming through, and it's like, oh, well, we did it because they were possessed.
Yeah. And certainly he does talk about that in the book, of just like the use of any kind of physical force should only, quote unquote, force should only be about trying to stop somebody attacking someone or trying to stop them hurting themselves, not as a way of, clearing them of spirits, basically.
Right.
Now, early in the book, there is quite a powerful piece where the author describes their journey from skeptic to believer based on things he has seen or experienced in his work that he says can't be explained by rational, psychological or scientific means. These include a young woman a self-described Satanist, who levitated for half an hour during her exorcism in front of 8 witnesses.
Good Lord.
Described as a once-in-a-century case, in the words of 2 experienced exorcists. A housewife whose hearing was blocked whenever anyone mentioned anything relating to religion, and who uttered vile blasphemies during recurring trance-like possessed states. A professional woman who suffered from unexplained bruises, spoke several languages completely unknown to her. And a petite woman who, in a possessed state, threw a 200-pound Lutheran deacon across a room.
I thought you were going to say a loofah.
Yeah, that's one big loofah.
A Lutheran deacon. He's very good in the shower.
Yeah.
Gosh. Okay. So the levitation. I thought that was a myth, but I'd love to see. Is it bad to say I'd love to see that? I would love to see that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to come on to that levitation actually a little bit later when I talk about one of the cases. So we are going to come back to that. Now, Gallagher says that when he is assessing people who are seeking an exorcism, he asks himself one basic question. Do the symptoms displayed by the patient have a natural or scientific explanation? So the assessments themselves can be quite thorough. In addition to psychiatric evaluation, they can include medical tests, blood work, brain scans or EEGs. Gallagher says that in those rare instances when it cannot be determined that there is a natural or scientific explanation for a person's condition, I refer the individual back to the priest, rabbi, pastor or imam or other spiritual advisor who sent that person to me. The men and women of faith make the final official determination and arrange for spiritual help if the patient is in need of such.
Oh, gosh, brain scans. I mean, makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, well, he was saying, it could be that, it could be something like that, pressure on the brain. He said in the book, which I did make a little note about, but I think it was more my skeptic side. He said, when needed. So there was a bit of me that I wonder how many people he has seen who've actually had all that kind of blood work and other stuff. But, that might be me just nitpicking. There's quite a fascinating bit in the book of how this psychiatrist ended up assessing people for exorcism. It started in the early 1990s when an elderly Catholic priest, who he says was one of the few official exorcists in the US. I love that. I'm an official one.
That would be so good, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So this official exorcist knocked on his door, just unannounced, and asked whether he could help evaluate a woman. The priest told him that the woman had undergone numerous psychiatric assessments, blood tests, and other medical examination, but nothing could explain her symptoms. So when Gallagher tells the priest he is sceptical about demonic possession, the priest replies, laughing, "This is why you're the perfect man for the job."
Right, yeah, of course.
So I think it's fun. Now, according to Dr. Gallagher, of all those cases where there is no diagnosable explanation, whether psychological or physical, they tend to fall into three types of what we might call paranormal activity. So I'd not heard of these. I kind of, naively, I just thought, well, somebody gets possessed and that's it. But there are different types of activity. The first being demonic oppression, a state defined as a demonic attack short of a full possession. Now, from my reading, it's different to possession because the entity doesn't take full control of the person's body.
But it causes illness and
bruises and attacks. Right. Yeah. There is possession, which is more like the kind of thing we associate with movies like The Exorcist, where the person for periods of time seems to be taken over by the entity. So the entity is kind of somehow within them and in control. The third type being infestations. These are more like the activity we associate with hauntings or poltergeists. They're not attacks on people directly, but on specific locations and objects.
Objects? I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Well, it reminded me of, we've done quite a few episodes on haunted objects, haven't you? But
yeah.
You don't think of them as, almost being possessed in that sense.
You don't think of them as under attack?
No.
Okay, that's interesting.
Now, when all three types of activity are evident together, I thought this was quite scary. They are described as extraordinary demonic assaults. That's an official term for them. EDAs. So let's have a look at an example of the first kind, demonic oppression, and a case featured in the book. It involves a tall middle-aged man who they've given the pseudonym of Stan. Now, Stan approached the clergy and was referred to Dr. Gallagher, claiming he, in his words, was being beaten by some spiritual forces, some kind of weird, unseen assailants. He claimed he would be periodically scratched. He showed the author scratches on his face and neck. He also brought photos of cuts across his legs and torso. Stan's wife confirmed that these marks seemed to occur spontaneously. Scary, isn't it, that?
That is, I sometimes I wake up and I've scratched my back and I don't, you know how you're like, I wonder how I managed that.
Right.
And it does go through my mind, is there a demon in my house or is it the dog?
Or is your dog a demon?
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't even thought about that.
You did call him Damon.
Yes.
No, you didn't. So Stan underwent both psychological and medical assessment, and no cause could be found for what was happening to him. Now, what comes out in this case, Ben, which is a theme that comes across in most of the cases throughout the book, is that Stan in his youth had a brief, what he called flirtation with Satanism.
There we are.
Stan had spent a few weeks worshipping Satan and had promised his soul to him in exchange for success. And as I said, the cases mostly seem to follow this theme. And they kind of range from, full-blown membership of a satanic group to some, teenage experimentation with a Ouija board. With Dr. Gallagher concluding that involvement with something satanic kind of gives the demons an in. That later it comes back to haunt these people who've now found or rekindled a deep religious faith. Although the other thing that I read and did make a note about is he talks about cases where people have always had a deep religious faith and not, meddled in anything satanic. And because of the strength of their faith, they can be susceptible, as if the spirits attack them because of that strong religious faith. And I wrote a note at that point saying, well, you can't win either way then, can you?
Right. Well, yes, that's true.
Almost better not to have any belief at all, whether dark or good, in that sense, religious belief. You're kind of opening yourself up, aren't you?
So does that mean atheists don't get possessed by demons?
Well, I started thinking that. I mean, he doesn't go into that in the book. Certainly all the cases in the book are people who are now religious or have always been religious, and the majority of what he calls genuine possessions or activity are people who've dabbled a bit in something, evil or satanic. But I did think, I wonder if that's partly because of who he's seeing, because he's mainly getting referred people from the Catholic Church. So it's logical he might come to that conclusion because he's seen people who've asked for some kind of exorcism because of their religious faith and the struggles they're having. I guess that doesn't mean there aren't, atheists or agnostics out there who probably wouldn't go, I'll go to a priest then. Like maybe that's not where they go, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it did make me wonder, is he making a conclusion, because of who he's seeing? And maybe there are other people that he's missing, especially because he does talk a lot about it being so big in other religions and cultures. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
In the end, Stan was helped by the process. I'm not going to go too heavy into all the cases because we'll be here all day. But one of the most bizarre and extreme cases featured in the book involves someone who is referred to as Julia, the Satanic Queen.
Oh, okay.
And this one illustrates an example of a full-blown possession. It's something straight out of a horror movie and starts in that vein. And I'll quote the author. He says, "The night before I met Julia, something unnerving happened. My family loves animals. And at the time, a French bulldog and 2 cats prowled around our house like long-time relatives. All 3 always got on well. The cats often curled up next to each other on our bed at night. But one night, around 3 a.m, it's always 3 a.m, isn't it?
Always.
There was loud screeching sound which startled me and my wife out of our sleep. Our 2 normally docile cats were going at it like champion prize fighters, smacking and clawing at each other, intent on inflicting some serious harm. My wife grabbed the female cat and I held on to the male. As we separated them into 2 different rooms, they continued to growl and bristle. My wife and I got back into bed mystified, but wrote off the tiff as something maybe like bad cat food or one too many sniffs of catnip. The next morning, Father Jacques rang the doorbell. He was standing at our front door with Julia. She was dressed in black pants with a dark purple blouse hanging loosely around her slight frame. I guess she was in her late 30s or early 40s. Her short hair was dyed jet black and her black eyeliner extended to her temples, the style I later learned that was favoured by her fellow cult members. Dressed again as always in his clerics, Father Jacques had his hands in his pocket, avoiding eye contact. "This is Julia," he said. "She has something to confess." With a smirk, Julia gazed at me. "How'd you like those cats last night?" she asked.
What the what?
Oh, yeah, hairs on the back.
What on earth is she doing?
Well, I couldn't work out if she kind of just... The implication is that somehow she'd used some evil thing to get the cats to go at each other, I guess.
But for the aim of what?
Just to freak him out, because she knew he was going to meet him.
Oh.
So this brings me on to the main signs that Dr. Gallagher says differentiates a genuine possession from cases with their roots in mental or physical conditions. And I guess it also lifts them from cases of oppression to demonic possession. So these include knowledge of things that a person should not know, in Julia's example, the cats. Though interestingly, he does say he doesn't believe that demonic spirits possess premonition. He says they're about as good as that as us humans.
Right, okay.
Levitation is another sign. I think that's quite an extreme one that's very rare. Enhanced physical strength. Talking in and understanding foreign languages that the person possessed should have no knowledge of, especially Latin. So, well, yeah, all demons could easily pass Latin A-level.
Well, this is what I'm thinking is why that? I mean, it's not like... Do you get any that are especially good at physics? It's very strange. I'm a humanities demon, me.
Yeah. It's a language thing. I don't know why. I mean, there's an official manual, certainly in the Catholic Church, for exorcists, and it talks about these main signs. To quote, the ability to speak an unknown language, the awareness of hidden knowledge, and various abnormal physical signs, especially immense strength, but also humanly impossible bodily movements, extreme contortions, and even the rare levitation.
The one I want to see.
Yeah. So
not going to impress me if it comes up quoting the Latin name for my spider plant.
Well, interestingly, he also said most priests exorcists have now dropped Latin. A lot of them prefer to use English. But he said one of the reasons for using Latin is, especially if the person that you're trying to exorcise doesn't know Latin, it's a good way of knowing if the spirit is there, because they'll often answer either in Latin or in English. But it's like, well, they understand the questions that are being asked, which I thought was interesting. At the time that Julia is being assessed by Dr. Gallagher, she is still a senior member of a satanic cult, but is beginning to have her doubts because of the frequency and nature of what she describes as possessions. She says, "I know I'm possessed. I space out and then I don't recall what happens. They tell me a voice comes out of me. I don't know. I don't remember anything. It's a demon, I'm sure. It's not Satan. He doesn't bother himself with small things like that. But it comes from him. Everything is under his control. I have long followed the master and done everything he wants for years." So you get this impression when you're reading her story. She's still part of this satanic cult. And almost you don't know whether she wants to be face an exorcism or change her ways or not. It's very unsure through the whole case.
Right, okay.
Which, again, is fascinating. There's also an interesting exchange where Julia mentions remote viewing.
Oh, no.
She's complaining about the first priest she talked to on the phone and says he doesn't know all the facts, him and his stupid heavy red curtains. Gallagher asks, how do you know he has red curtains? You told me you spoke to him over the phone. Julia replies that she has powers, one of them being what students of the paranormal call remote viewing.
Oh, no. I don't want to do it anymore.
Another scene straight out of a horror movie is when the doctor and priest are driving Julia to her next exorcism. I think that's worth pointing out as well. It's not like you have one exorcism. These go on for quite a while, over a period of time, multiple, basically.
And she's willing to go. That's the thing.
Yeah. So while they're driving her to this exorcism, she becomes possessed and starts talking in a raspy voice, insulting the two men.
In French.
It's in English.
Ah.
Saying,
"She is ours. We will never let her go, you stupid monkey priest."
That's not too bad.
Meaning the entity regards them as apes rather than spirits, I think, which is interesting.
Okay.
Now, one of the most chilling encounters for me is when Dr. Gallagher and the priest were having a phone call discussing the case. So Julia wasn't present on the call or in the room with them, but another voice came on the line screaming,
"Leave her alone, you effing priest. She belongs to us, not you. You'll be sorry."
Ouch.
Yeah.
That's what happens if you use monkey priests. So there's other entities there.
Yes, who can come on the phone as well, which I don't know, I find that even more weird. I don't know, that was quite scary to me, that because I guess in that one you can, as a skeptic head, you can maybe kind of go, well, actually the thing in the back of the car, it was just her messing with them or even subconsciously doing it. But how she would be able to hack or tap into their phones, you can't think of a way, can you?
No, not
I mean,
really.
she's not with the CIA. She's with a satanic group. I mean, maybe they're pretty organised. Who knows? Now, in one of Julia's exorcism, here we go. We're getting to it, Ben. It is claimed that Julia was sitting in a chair and then began to levitate, which lasted for half an hour.
Surely the temptation would be to... I'd have to get a hoop or something and...
A measurer.
Yeah, or go underneath and...
Yeah. Well, it said she rose a foot out of the chair. Several present tried to pull her back down, but struggled, saying that if they had not tried to pull her back down, they believed she would have risen to the ceiling.
That's a good trick.
Now, I have to point out, Dr. Gallagher was not present for this, but was told the story by two priests who he trusted. He also says that less commonly present, but associated with some traditional demonic possessions, may be the remarkable ability of the possessed person to affect the surrounding physical environment, especially during exorcism. These include the ability to emit intense, raucous noises of various sorts, to make a room hot or frigidly cold, which again we know from The Exorcist, or to exude remarkable, powerful, sometimes sulphurous smells. Well, we can all do that, can't we?
We can all do that. Again, the dog can too.
All witnesses to Julia's sessions testified to the periodical appearance of all these phenomena. So she had the full gambit of everything you could get, basically.
No wonder she's the possessed queen.
Well, I think, again, he seems to make the point because she has been so invested in this satanic cult and satanic behaviour. She almost initially welcomed it in rather than being taken over. It was more invited it in, that somehow that made it worse.
I wonder why they go for levitation as well. What? I mean, it's creepy, but it's not in essence evil.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah.
Is it just a demonstration of power?
Maybe, yeah, or just to instill fear. Maybe, I don't know. I guess it's the way those things are used in the movie in The Exorcist are to put fear, aren't they? To throw the exorcists off their game or to make them question their faith and power.
Yeah.
Well, after this exorcism, where she levitated, Julia chose not to continue with the process, and the author just says she was never delivered from her demonic presence. And then
she never was?
No, and then he lost touch with her, so he doesn't know what happened to her in the end.
He flew away?
Yeah.
How old was she?
Late 30s, early 40s.
Oh, right. So, she had plenty of time left to just go and wander off and be possessed?
Yeah.
Oh. Did she hold down a job, do you know?
I don't know. It doesn't mention that in the thing. I mean, I think that the cult she was in they weren't huge, but there's probably about 20 or 30 people as part of the cult. Almost a bit Manson family-esque, I took it as.
Right, yeah. Because that would be quite difficult in the office and you start levitating.
Yeah. Can you just give me 5?
Yeah. I don't know how you'd pull a possession and a normal job together.
No. Well, unless you've got more control over when you come possessed.
Yeah, maybe.
Now, it's difficult, of course, to think of rational explanations for some of those events. But I was struck by some of Julia's background. Especially, there's this bit very briefly mentioned, which I think is interesting, especially from a psychiatrist and psychologist. When she was a teenager, she was sexually abused by a priest, which more than contributed to her joining the satanic cult.
Right, okay.
And that information sparked my skeptic, or I guess some would say bias side that I mentioned earlier. I mean, given that experience, it's not surprising that Julia might have a resentment, if not hatred, of the church, and likely would have been psychologically damaged by that experience, right?
Absolutely right.
I mean, I guess it would not explain her abilities at remote viewing, which included describing when people involved in the case were on holiday, what they were doing and what they were wearing. So one of the priests, she goes, he's fishing right now in, green khaki shorts. And the psychiatrist phones the priest and says, what are you doing now? He said, I'm just fishing. You wearing green khaki shorts? Yeah. He said, have you been speaking to Julia?
Oh.
It wouldn't explain the levitation, but I've got some other left field thoughts on all this, which I'll come back later. So I'll come back to that, actually. So another fascinating case involves a man who is called Juan. Not going to go into much detail of this, but who, after a life of crime, became a born-again Christian, but is still plagued by evil spirits. Now, at one stage in his life, Juan was a member of an organised Hispanic crime gang, where as part of that gang, he worshipped and prayed to Santa Muerta. Have you heard of Santa Muerta?
I have not.
Translates to Holy Death. Some of you out there listening may know about this from the TV series Breaking Bad, where they're the two twins who are part of the cartel, and they pray at the shrine of Santa Muerta to give them power. So many gang members, like Juan, would ask Santa Muerta for power, success, and protection. So again, Gallagher believes it was Juan's interaction with these evil spirits that led him to this later possession when he'd found God, basically. Because he went to prison and then he kind of, got his life back together, but this still haunted him. But he said, certainly in Mexican and some South American crime gangs and cartels, praying to Santa Muerta is quite a big thing in terms of protection and keeping you alive and making you successful.
Right, okay. But that does sound like that would open the doors for you to have stuff come in.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you ask for it in a way. You kind of say, I'll give you my soul if you give me this. Although the guy did end up getting arrested and go to prison, so maybe it's not all great. Sorry, Santa Muerta, I'm not questioning your power.
Oh, God.
What have I just done?
One of those jelly babies is levitating.
Yeah. As long as it levitates into my mouth, I don't mind. Now, Gallagher does also highlight some of the cases he's worked on that were not possessions, but were connected to a person's mental health or state, including someone they called Lily, who had an abusive childhood and in early adulthood found security, friendship, and a sense of family in a religious group. Now, Lily started to exhibit signs of being possessed, including talking in strange, rasping voices, her body being seemingly taken over by outside forces, writhing like a snake. Gallagher, in an interview with her, or after an interview, concludes that perhaps initially subconsciously, Lily started to display these traits as a reaction to her traumatic upbringing. Mm-hmm. But then she got the attention from the group and the behaviour almost spiralled. I guess in some ways she didn't want to disappoint them, and she was getting their attention because they were like, oh my God, she's kind of possessed. And she kind of comes clean at the end that she's hamming it up, I guess is the best way to describe it. But she says that once she started it, she felt like if she stopped, she might be kicked out of the group and lose her newfound family, basically.
Right, okay.
And I put that in because it highlighted to me how difficult it must be to assess, if you believe in it, whether a person is truly possessed or not.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
Now, Gallagher also features some historical cases that he believes are genuine cases of possession, not that he was involved in, but historical ones, where he says the spirit or entity has somehow feigned mental illness to throw the exorcists off track.
Oh, of course it would, yeah.
Almost like a trickster spirit.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Which, again, if you believe in the reality of possession, again implies you need to be an incredibly skilled psychologist to discern the difference, don't you?
Yeah.
The author points out the real danger for individuals who have psychological illnesses that are mistaken for demonic attacks is that such people may not be educated to accept that they have psychiatric difficulties. They may expend major energy looking for a simple or magical answer to their complex difficulties, such as via an exorcism or deliverance. I've encountered quite a few people who went to extreme lengths to avoid psychiatric help for years, running from one priest or minister to another, wasting everyone's time, mostly their own. There are words of warning in the book for New Age spiritualists, psychic mediums, Ouija board dabblers, paranormal investigators and paranormal podcasters.
Not paranormal podcasters.
He does mention podcasts at one stage.
Does he?
Yes.
Oh, no.
He says that whether they are legitimate or fake, well, this was my reading of it, these are not his words, they might unleash or invite something in that they don't understand and without religious faith and help that they cannot control. I think he's more aiming this at ghost hunters and mediums.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so ghost hunting YouTubers, podcasters, and we don't really do much of that. I guess we dabble every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, we have been ghost hunting. We've been looking for werewolves.
Yeah.
Maybe they're demonic entities. We didn't cover that, but they could be.
Yeah, we were trying to, Mrs. Tibble in the pub. We were trying to get hold of her spirit.
Yes, she did throw a beer mat at us, probably.
He would say she didn't.
Well, he wasn't there.
Not her.
Oh, no. Is this what I fear about, like, the hungry... right, yeah.
That's exactly what you fear. But, yeah, he's basically saying if you've not got religious faith and you've not got religious help, then you are really opening yourself up for something you can't handle and don't understand.
You see, whenever we do stuff that is a bit in that realm, we have, various, I would say, like white witches and spiritualists who give us something to do. Because I don't have faith in, I'm an atheist, I suppose. I don't believe in anything particular, but I do appreciate the help that they give. Yeah. I hope that's enough.
According to him, it's not.
Oh.
He's quite militant on the fact it's, proper religious people, proper priests. If we took a priest with us, but then he'd say, by dabbling in it in the first place, what are you doing? So, yeah, he's quite staunch in his opinion on that, I would say.
And you see, I wish it would tell my phone, which keeps advertising via Amazon, a Ouija board to me every single day.
Yeah. So the final category of demonic activity is infestation. I guess it is the area of the paranormal we are more familiar with, or at least is more widely reported. So these include ghosts, poltergeists, dark shadows, this is his words, things that go bump in the night, sacred objects breaking or religious pictures falling to the floor, unexplained noises, screams, table rising and then collapsing, bedroom chests tipping onto victims. All are best seen as infestations which have been reported in all ages. Gallagher says, such hauntings and other paranormal manifestations are fodder for endless documentaries and interminable analysis by a parade of pseudo-experts on cable channels and across the internet. All right.
Oh, jeez.
All right.
Wind your neck in.
Yeah. Just because you don't have a go at us. Now, interesting in terms of ghosts and poltergeists, it's what I was talking about earlier. Gallagher does not believe they are the spirits of the dead. He believes that they are evil entities that want to overthrow, undermine, or corrupt God's work. So in the case of, are we looking for Mrs. Tibble's ghost? She threw a beer mat. No, he's saying that is an evil entity. It's not the spirit of a dead person.
That is very much how... Do you remember me telling you about my friend and the Ouija board whilst we're on a ghost hunt?
Yes.
And it seemed like her grandmother had come through using a very specific word. And she was convinced that isn't my grandmother. And to be honest, I'm not sure it was either, because it then spelt out, ha, 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 ha.
Right.
And, I don't think that's a sweet old lady from beyond.
Yeah.
That is something just messing.
Yeah. Well, the author is definitely in that camp. Not dead people. It is evil spirits who are not the souls of humans. They're not. There's nothing human about them. They are demonic.
Yeah, yeah.
So a few other key points that interested me were the author's views on why it's reported that women are more susceptible than men, which I guess doesn't really just count with possessions. I guess that you call it a possession. I was thinking about, it's been said often about the Enfield poltergeist case and stuff like that. He believes that's a misconception. He said most exorcists report an equal occurrence of males seeking exorcism, but females are probably more open to being helped, which is also the case in the mental health field, which is a good point. This may be why some exorcists believe females are more commonly attacked. So I thought that was a really interesting point, that we hear about the cases that are more female-based rather than male, because even if someone seeks an exorcism, he's kind of saying they drop out, and that is the similar in terms of people seeking mental health.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's worth saying, he doesn't say all, but he said that most of the work he does in this field, he does pro bono. I guess he writes books and stuff, so he has got some kind of living out of it. And interestingly, I think this was a good point as well. He said, actually, most of the work happens outside the exorcism ritual. It's the person's own spiritual work that they are doing that has the biggest effect.
Right, okay.
I read it as, I don't think he said this directly, I read it as is almost the exorcism helps unnerve the spirit, focus the mind of the person who's possessed, and then, it's their spiritual work that's going to get rid of it in the end.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's also a very interesting chapter on false memories and satanic panic, where he does draw parallels with alien abduction cases, briefly. That he has come across many cases where hypnosis has been used and memories of satanic abuse or possession have been falsely created.
Yeah.
He calls hypnosis a dubious way of trying to help people recall memories. It is a common element in many false memory cases. These recollections have been labelled repressed memories by some, but when elicited under such conditions, they have repeatedly been shown to be unreliable, especially after long years of total lack of recall of such dramatic episodes. So again, I don't know how true this is, but he's saying, no, if you've had some of this stuff, you're going to remember. You're not going to forget it. You may not remember if you're possessed at the time, but you will remember afterwards. So he feels that hypnosis is just planting a memory that's not there.
Okay, yeah.
Some of the final words in the book, I think, kind of summed up my journey of reading it, actually, and researching the subject. Dr. Gallagher says, as a physician and a believer in the reality of possession, I came to see I had a responsibility to be willing to speak out and strike a sensible balance between extreme scepticism and naive credulity, as emphasised throughout this book. In the service of these goals, I came to find, a bit surprisingly, that the various media outlets, print, radio, online, podcasts and television, were eager to inquire about my findings and viewpoint. In their reporting, some are professional and accurate, some distort the realities of this subject, but overall the media have treated me fairly. Most people fall into the category of intrigued but sceptical, and those are the people who I envisaged might find this book the most eye-opening and helpful. It does presume a certain understanding of the limits of a too narrow view of what real science entails, as well as a certain openness to the notion of a spiritual realm beyond our awareness. My experience has been that thoughtful people find both assumptions to be valid, a very human impulse, though they often have no one to help them navigate such choppy waters. I felt a bit like that idea of me just, trying to keep an open mind during it, and and making those notes help me do it, because it's almost like I'll write my skeptical, a bit like the remote viewing, I'll write my skeptical notes down and save them and come back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does he ever say what these demons want, what they're after? Is it a battle between heaven and hell?
Pretty much.
And so he thinks that the realm of Satan is real? Yes.
And they're trying to undermine God's work, effectively.
Oh, right, so that's why there is a possession.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't want to misrepresent him. He doesn't make that direct connection, but somehow I guess it's people who've dabbled, let's put it this way, people who've dabbled in something satanic almost open a door a little bit for a demon to enter, and that gives the demon the opportunity to, strike some confusion, pain, uncertainty in the realm of God.
Which would be why, if you had a religious belief, that would be the right thing to do. If you didn't carry the way, then what good would the demon be doing?
Now, let me talk a little bit about my skeptic side. So here were some random thoughts I noted while going through the book. I wondered whether perhaps Dr. Gallagher had been witnessing a type of mental disorder or delusions that didn't fit our current knowledge of psychology. And because of his deep religious belief that then gets reinforced about the type of stuff we were just talking about, that leans him towards seeing it's a spiritual issue rather than a psychological one. It's something that needs to be treated by an exorcist rather than it could be some kind of either psychological condition we don't know about or has not been, assessed yet. I guess it doesn't explain those cases where people have knowledge they shouldn't have outside of something paranormal. I mean, yeah, they could get lucky. Or I did start to wonder in Julia's case, who was a member of a satanic cult, things like the cats and stuff like that. She could have, turned up the night before, couldn't she?
Yes.
Set it up effectively like a good magician to fool those involved, I guess.
But she wouldn't know that the cats had done that in the bedroom, would she?
No, but maybe, like he said, catnip. Maybe she gave the cats something, got them to eat something, you know what I mean, that would make them behave crazily. And then all she needs to do is turn up the next day and say, how did you enjoy the cats last night? You know what I mean?
What about the red curtains and the levitation?
Well, I was thinking about the levitation. I wondered, was it in fact just someone struggling in a chair? Then through the hysteria of the situation, it gets reported as an unnatural levitation. Do you know what I mean? But there is another one I thought of, and maybe this is me reaching a little bit. We like to reach, don't we?
Like S Club 7.
Yeah. For the stars. I also thought it could be something outside of a physical or mental condition. It could be something genuinely paranormal. Something like interdimensional beings playing with us.
Yes.
And I thought about it in case of, we love going back to the ants. We're back to the ants.
We love the ants.
I thought about it a bit like a small child playing with ants, either not realising or caring that they are causing harm to that creature or distress. Do you know what I mean? Maybe they are kind of teenage or toddler entities that don't know what they're doing and, maybe get a scolding from the adult entities. Why stop possessing those people? It's not good for them. You know what I mean? Are there interdimensional beings that are outside our general perception that in some ways can possess us? I think other ideas are worth exploring, given that this phenomenon has been going on for centuries across multiple religions and spiritual cultures. I also had this thought that was going through my mind from a Christian perspective, or I guess any religious perspective, but let's talk about it from a Christian perspective. I'm struck people say, you do hear of miracles, you do hear of people seeing angels, but there's almost this belief that God doesn't interfere, that, you know what I mean? It's faith. That's the basis of faith. I'm not going to give you signs. I'm not going to do this stuff. I know Jesus did, but, because you have to have faith, as George Michael would say. Yeah. But in a way, I wonder if that almost makes people possessed by evil spirits and exorcism and seeing all this stuff, if you are a deep religious believer or a priest, that almost solidifies your belief in God. If he's not going to give us a sign, well, these guys exist, so if they exist, he must exist.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Which made me think of some level of just, I guess, a bit like my bias coming into the book and trying to set it aside. It must be hard if you're a priest to set that aside, or the guy writing this book, because he has a deep religious faith and believes these things are real. So maybe it becomes hard to be objective, even on a subconscious level.
Yeah. I think I would agree with you on all of those things. And I've often suspected, where I lie on this, I think they're non-human entities too. I think that's what they are.
Yeah. I mean, it's in many ways, it's just as good an explanation as any other, isn't it? I know the author would definitely disagree with that, and that's a very dangerous thing to say, he would say. Well, the book really made me think. I would like to think the author would agree I did try and come at it with an open mind. I mean, there's much more I didn't cover in the book, and there's a lot more cases that I didn't even touch on, so it's well worth checking out. It's called Demonic Foes, My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist, Investigating Possessions, Diabolic Attacks and the Paranormal, and it's by Richard Gallagher.
Nice.
I've got two final messages, actually, that I just want to say at the end. So my first one is, whether you believe in the idea of demonic possession or not, even Dr. Gallagher, who is firmly a believer, states that possessions are extremely rare and the vast majority of cases are explained by psychological or medical reasons. So I was just thinking, if this episode or his book have sparked something in you or stoked concerns for you or someone else, consulting medical or mental health professionals should be your starting point.
Good point.
And I put some links in the show notes for UK and US organisations that provide free mental health support or advice. I mean, if you're outside the UK, just do an online search for free mental health support, or alternatively, I guess, contact your doctor.
Yeah.
But do that first. Final point is a small one, but I know whenever we do an episode like this and we post stuff about it or post the episode on social media, you always get scammy people putting little messages at the end saying, oh, contact us. I know this guy who can... your husband may have left you, but he got my husband back in 2 days. All you have to do is pay him $100 and he'll sort your life out. We try and keep an eye out for those scammy things. Sometimes we post stuff in groups. It's hard to manage. Sometimes we miss them. We try and take them down. But, ignore them. Please don't engage with them.
You'll only encourage them.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know where I stand. I think I'd gone from this is purely a mental and physical health issue, that there's no such thing as anything outside of that. I think given this guy's pedigree and experience has made me question that, because, he knows what he's talking about, and so something could be going on there. Whether that is his definition of satanic or evil spirits trying to overthrow God or undermine God, or whether it's something else like interdimensional beings just kind of, accidentally being a bit mean to us, who knows? But did make me question.
Yeah. No, I'm not quite sure where I come out on this, but it's sort of, you say what I would think as well. So, yeah, I'm gonna have a look into it. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Don't forget, I've nearly forgot, patreon.com, that's the word, patreon.com/TQM pod. Please come and join us. Loads of exclusive stuff, bits and pieces, and a nice, friendly community. As far as I know, there are no demons.
No demons that I've come across yet. There's a bit of remote viewing, though, so I don't know.
There is a bit of remote viewing, yes. And if all else fails, some people put up pictures of their dogs. So, just saying.
Can't go wrong with that.
You can't really go wrong with that. So, in the immortal words of George Michael, I will say, Club Tropicana, drinks are free. TQM pod, Patreon, it's not quite free, but it's nearly. It's good. It's good price.
Yeah. It's definitely less than a cocktail.
It's certainly less than a cocktail. Oh, my life. I was in London a week ago.
Right.
4 people. The 4 of us, including me. And I got 4 beers, and it was £28.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous, not even a cocktail.
No, it was just a normal beer.
We're going to go now, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?